Thank you for tuning in once again. Today we're going to talk about survivors of suicide as they are confronted with the idea of being abandoned by their loved one. Yes, that's very common. In fact, survivors of suicide are confronted with all kinds of disturbing and difficult elements that are less commonly experienced by survivors who lose loved ones to other types of deaths. Yes, this deep sense of abandonment can be quite painful. Now, how about you? Do you feel wounded because your loved one chose to leave you? If you do, you're not alone. The experience of being left behind, well, there are many and they depend on what your relationship was with the deceased. For example, let's say a spouse is left behind by her partner. She must now contend with legal, financial, parental, and who knows, sometimes occupational problems. Knowing that your spouse made this choice, you might be thinking, and he chose to leave me to pick up the pieces? How could he do that to me? Another option might be children of parents who, in their own lives, also struggle with those left behind feelings. They may commonly internalize that the person who promised to provide for them, protect them, and guide them, well, they didn't think that I was important enough to stick around. And they might think, I guess mom didn't love me all that much after all. Parents who lose a child to suicide often carry heavy guilt. The sense of responsibility may be especially true if the victim is a young adolescent or young adult who recently left the nest. They might think, I must have been a terrible parent if she was so intent on leaving me. Or how could he throw his life away knowing he would also ruin my life? Do any of those scenarios sound familiar in your experience? Of course you will ponder, question, and examine the relationship you thought that you had. You might question, didn't I mean anything to my loved one? Your loved one isn't here to answer these questions, of course. Now, if they had left a note apologizing for their decision, that might help a bit. But here's something I want you to know. The truth is that their ultimate decision probably had less to do with your relationship than you might think. Well, what do I mean by that? What I mean is a person who has reached the point of actually killing himself or herself is most likely not thinking logically. Does that make sense? Their psychological pain, their fear, and their sense of hopelessness are going to cloud their normal thinking processes. At that point, they probably aren't thinking clearly about the people who love them. Rather, they're more likely thinking something like, I can't live like this anymore, or I have to escape my fear and pain. They might also be thinking something like, no one is really going to miss me anyway. Now, of course, such thoughts are not true, not even really rational, but their frontal cortex is hampered by negative thoughts and painful emotions. They have truly lost the ability to think rationally. They're out of the context of their normal reality. Most commonly, survivors, well, we don't get a rational explanation for our loved one's decision. An example, a recent client of mine who had lost her husband to suicide the year before told me that she searched and searched for a goodbye note. What she ultimately ended up finding were just some scribbled notes, wadded up and sitting in a trash can in their rented storage space. The garbled message she found seemed to reflect the mind of a person confused, in great pain, and very desperate. The words didn't really make sense. Rather, she described it as a melancholy word salad. Apparently, he had given up trying to make sense of his tangled thoughts and feelings. She was left to wonder what was really going on in his mind. And for many survivors, that is the most that they will ever get. Some will get no explanation at all. The process of thought will never be known in this life. And having no closure on the why of a suicide is terribly dissatisfying and unsettling. And if that happened to you, you know what I'm talking about. In response to being left behind, you may feel hurt, anger, shock, anguish, bewilderment. These strong and sometimes contrasting emotions are real, and they're appropriate under the circumstances. So just do your best to experience and acknowledge these difficult emotions. Don't try to bury them. Don't try to numb them. Don't try to avoid them. Now, I'm not saying don't take their decision personally. What could be more personal than losing a close loved one to suicide? But while their actions don't seem to align up with the relationship you remember, it doesn't mean that you weren't important to your loved one. I'm sure you were. The decision to end her or his life also doesn't mean your loved one wished to get away from you or didn't care how much you would hurt. Rather, I believe they chose their desperate need to end pain over the choice to continue to live in pain. Now, wrapping up this episode, I want to leave you with some key thoughts. A person on the verge of suicide is not thinking clearly or rationally. Their decision to take their life is primarily influenced by a desperate need to end their pain, and not a reflection of how they felt about you. Your bewilderment, shock, pain, and anger are natural and normal responses to the death of a loved one by suicide. Living without your loved one is hard. Living without answers to our questions makes it even harder. As always, I want to leave you with a stepping stone. Consider this. Try writing your loved one a note in a paragraph or two, not a long letter. Just tell them how their decision to end their life has hurt you and left you feeling abandoned. Share what unanswered questions you have been wrestling with and how it feels to know you won't get any answers in this life. Read it aloud to yourself, and/or if you have a safe friend, share it so you have someone to speak to about it. Finally, I want to leave you with this reflection that I've written for this episode. Some of my most important questions will never be answered. Experience peace when there are no answers, I'm learning, is the secret place I must find. Acceptance, I'm told, is my path to serenity, and only there will I find joy in the not knowing of my life. Well, thank you again for tuning in today, and I hope this episode has brought you some little bit more of understanding, some relief, or a little insight. I'll speak with you soon. Be well in the meantime.